All right, and now I really am standing in between everyone and lunch. I'm Sarah Treuhaft, Director of Equitable Growth Initiatives at PolicyLink, right down the street here in Oakland. PolicyLink is a national research and action institute. Our mission is advancing economic and social equity, so that's what we do, and that's at the heart of the tool that I'm going to describe to you today. And my work is really around how do we make the case for equity? How do we build this movement? What's the narrative changes that we need to see in order to make that shift? What are the policy goals, and how can we use data to help spread that? So I am not a health person, just to admit. Please don't ask me what collinearity is, although I have people on my team who know that. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about what that narrative is and how we've developed this tool, the National Equity Atlas, which is around making data that describes why equity is an economic imperative and shares how people can measure it locally in their regions, how we built that tool and what it contains. And I think I'm going to have the opportunity over lunch to do a demo of the tool. So what is the narrative? About 5 years ago, we released a paper called America's Tomorrow, Equity is the Superior Growth Model. And that paper, which we produced, I have to share the responsibility. We produced it with the Program for Environmental and Regional Equity at the University of Southern California, which is a research institute headed by Manuel Pastor, whose research you might be familiar with on environmental justice, equitable growth, et cetera. But that paper made the case that as America's demographics are shifting, we're becoming a majority people of color nation, that really makes equity not just a moral imperative, but also an economic imperative for our communities and for the nation as a whole. And so one way to tell that story is to ground it in a place. And so the picture that you're seeing here, I don't know if anybody has been to the Gulfton neighborhood in Houston, Texas. Okay, great. So Houston is, I think Houston and Oakland vie with each other for being the most diverse cities. And Gulfton is an incredibly diverse neighborhood. It has a historic African-American community. It also has a diverse immigrant community, Asian, Latino immigrants, et cetera. And I was there a couple years ago, and I was at this neighborhood center where these children are, and I could not find a picture of the image that I saw at this neighborhood center, but I'll describe it for you. So these children and their classmates were running around in this courtyard with these jerseys, bright jerseys, and they had numbers on the back of them, years, 2025, 2026, 2027. And those years are the year that they would graduate from college. So these were, children, school children in a neighborhood that's 40% poverty. A third of the children in that neighborhood will drop out of high school, but yet they had these aspirations. And they were in a program that was helping them to get there. And so these children, I mean, this is our future. Our future looks like this neighborhood. So equity is really about enabling those children and people like them and adults, members of their community, to achieve their goals and to reach we define it as reaching their full potential. So that's what our narrative is really about. And we believe in the power of data for starting conversations and for providing the evidence behind this narrative. And so we have lots of data on demographic change. So this is a picture of demographic change in the nation. So you can see here the gray bars are the white population, so that's easiest to track here. So in 1980, the population was 80% white. In 2010, it was 64% white, but as you can see, by 2050, 47% white, and the US Census projects that in 2044, we will make that shift to a majority people of color nation. Here is just another visualization of that in terms of which counties are already majority people of color, the red ones. And this is 1980. 2040. So you see that expansion, but this map actually does not show the extent of our demographic transformation because diversity really is increasing everywhere. And so here's another way to look at the data, looking at what is the share of growth, population growth, that's attributable to growing communities of color. And so here you start to see, red in the middle of the country, not just around the edges of the country, because even in the Midwest, in places like Rhode Island, they're still predominantly white, yet it is growing communities of color, Latinos, Asians, immigrants of other Black immigrants that are contributing growth, while their senior population, the baby boomers are leaving the workforce, and this is actually creating a dynamic in terms of the demographics where the contributions of every new worker are going to be more and more important to the community as a whole, because the burden of caring for the elders is going to be shifting on them. So the future is now. This is about these demographic changes aren't just in the future. As you saw, it's today. 65 of the nation's largest cities already have majority people of color populations. This is true in many regions, many counties, and the youth. So already today, the majority of babies being born are of color, and the majority of children under age 5 are of color. And the majority of youth in public schools are of color as well. So the future really is today. Inequity threatens economic prosperity. So a huge part of our framing is around the risk of the inequities that these children and other communities of color face. I'm not going to talk about them. You all know them. That is the purpose of the Atlas, is to share that, but it's just an important part of our narrative around why this matters. What I did want to share with you is the research base that's growing. And so at the same time that the 2010 census data was coming out, highlighting the demographic shift that our country is undergoing, there's new research coming out, which I would say is really a new consensus within the field of economics, highlighting the risk of rising inequality to our nation's economic prosperity. And so at the bottom here is a citation from a study from the IMF showing that they looked at inequality and the rise in inequality across nations and found that it actually hinders sustained growth and prosperity. So we see studies like this coming out from institutions like the OECD, the World Bank, the IMF. These are not your typical lefty progressive organizations. Also, the quote here from Larry Summers, pointing to the risk that he sees in terms of racial disparities in terms of our economic future. So there really is a growing momentum around the idea that inequity and inequality are bad for growth. And as we say it, equity is the superior growth model. We have a whole policy agenda around how to make this real. That's not my focus today, but I will highlight some of the research that we've done to prove this. So this is a map showing how much stronger the economies of each region would be if we closed racial gaps in income. So those gaps are a function of differences in employment, we used hours worked, and differences in wages, so the racial gaps in wages. And so we found that nationally, our economy, this reminds me of your study, Tom, the economy would be $2.1 trillion larger every year were it not for these racial economic disparities. So in terms of getting to the Atlas, I wanted to talk about how we tailored this framing to regions. It's really based on our work in diverse regions across the country. So we set up a structure, right? So we set out a definition. What is a definition of an equitable region? And that's what you're looking at here. And so we thought about 3 characteristics. We thought about contributing to the economic vitality and prosperity of the region. Are you able to contribute to the economy? Being the workforce that's needed for the future of the region. Is the region ready? Is the workforce ready for the jobs that are coming online? And connecting to the region's assets and resources. So those 3 this is a picture of our indicators framework, which we used in regions to do deep equity profiles, which I'm going to describe in a minute, but it's also the framework that underlies the National Equity Atlas, which is the way that we are democratizing that data. So the framework looks at the demographic shifts. So we found that demographic change is an effective way, or can be an effective way, to start a conversation around disparities and inequities, because conversations around race are hard, but the demographic shifts provide an entree into it. People can see it happening in their communities. So looking at demographics and then looking at these three components of equity. So economic vitality, looking at wages, looking at rising inequality, looking at employment, other economic indicators, readiness. This is really the human capital. So looking at education levels, looking at health. This is where health equity fits into this broader framework around equity. And then connectedness, things like housing and transportation, neighborhood poverty. So we built a database for the largest, we focused on regions, the largest 150 regions. And so we built a database that includes those regions, which are highlighted here, and then all 50 states and the District of Columbia and the US as a whole. And these are the data sources. So we used population projections from Woods and Pool. A lot of the data is really based on the micro data from the US Census. So for you all, I know that that's probably a really mundane and basic data source, but for the folks that we work with, the advocates working on the ground and policymakers, they don't have access to it. And the census, even just the basic census data on something like home ownership, if you want to disaggregate it by race, it's really hard to access from the fact finder. So US Census, if you're listening, the tool is not so easy to use for everyday people. And so our database includes a bunch of data sources. And what we did was through a grant, actually, somebody had mentioned, actually Rajiv at the beginning of the day was talking about HUD and the HUD Sustainable Communities Initiative. So we received a grant to be technical assistance providers to help regions across the country that were getting these grants around regional sustainability planning to help them infuse equity into their work. And so as a piece of that grant, we worked in these regions here. One of them might be an outlier, actually. I think San Francisco paid for it themselves. But most of these regions were regions that had grants from HUD to do this regional planning, and we worked with them to produce these equity profiles. When you see this list, people always ask me to, did you have, what were your reasons for choosing those regions? Were they really strategic in terms of the policy and politics? And no, it was not strategic in that manner. It was really the communities that had shown an interest and a will to work with us to build these equity profiles, because we set up a process where we would produce the data for them looking at equity in their region, and they would provide feedback, they would provide local data, they would help us interpret it and make sure that we were producing a story that is useful for them in moving forward their advocacy efforts. And so this is a picture of a data profile and the type of data that's in it. I'm not going to go in depth into what is in these profiles, but it's about 100 different indicators, disaggregated by race, ethnicity, nativity, gender to the extent that we could. The process of engaging with these regions was really fundamental to our understanding of what type of framework would work and what type of data would work in a national tool like the National Equity Atlas that we wanted to build. And so things that we learned were around data disaggregation. So for example, in Southeast Florida, they have a large Black immigrant population, so we realized that we really need to break down that population. In Detroit, they have a large Middle Eastern population that is not in any of the normal census categories, and so we had to go to the data and try to disaggregate to look at that population. Similar things in other places, and then a lot of work to ask questions of the data, like Tom's presentation, looking at the way the data is arrayed and thinking of other explanatory factors. And so this, I did pull out this for a purpose, which is just to show we try to disaggregate as much as we can with this data. So this is showing it's wages and employment actually by race and then education level. So starting to help people have a conversation around why do you still have those disparities in wages and education by race, even among people with the same education level. Because, oh, and one other thing important to say about these collaborations. So we were asking people who worked within a region, so the suburbs and the cities within a region, to come together around this data, because that's what the HUD grant was about. So there were people of differing political persuasions, different sectors, workforce, the business community, education, et cetera, in addition to civil rights folks. So that was our process of developing and testing the framework in the Equity Atlas. I'm just going to show you a couple slides about what the Equity Atlas is. Like I said, there will be a demo over lunch, and it's a website, so you can go to nationalequityatlas.org. But you'll see that we really embedded this narrative and then the indicators framework within the Atlas, which is trying to democratize data and make it more broadly available. So the homepage is about the framing around demographic change, around the threat of inequities, and around the benefits of investing in equity. Here is a snapshot of our indicators. So you'll see here, the indicators are arrayed like the framework in the profiles and like our messaging framework. So demographics, and there's demographic change variables there, equity across those 3 domains, and then the economic benefits of equity. I'm going to show you also a picture, before I go there. So we really focused on data visualizations and what are useful charts, maps, graphics for people to share and have discussions around this data and use in their work to download. And then we provide wraparound supports to help people interpret the data. So there is no substitute for local discussions, local information, but we're trying to provide people with some information for understanding how to look at this data. So we have interpretation of the data, why it matters, how it connects to this goal around inclusive growth, the types of policy strategies that you can use to advance equity within these indicators, and then an example of how people are doing that on the ground, and then additional resources. I just have a few slides left. I know that we're at time, but I did want to give you a couple examples of how people are using our data and other similar data to inform their strategies going forward. So one is around political leadership. So we actually have a mayor in the United States right now, the mayor of Minneapolis, Betsy Hodges, who campaigned on this message. Or it was one of her 3 messages, but it was that racial inclusion is key to the city's growth and the region's growth and prosperity in the future. So we have, political leadership coming together around this. She uses this data and other data. They have a great data team. They're really moving forward on it. And we're seeing more attention across the nation on equity. In Oakland, they just started an Office of Equity. Here's a specific outcome of our data profiles. So in Rhode Island, we did a data profile in the state of Rhode Island. It wasn't a region, but they had gotten the Sustainable Communities Grant, so it was the whole state. And after we released the profile, the governor then, Lincoln Chafee, saw the demographic shifts and saw the imperative of equity, and he launched this new initiative focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and started a new office. It focuses on minority contracting. It focuses on equity in hiring in the state government, and so that's moving forward. I think that he was interested in doing something already, and then the profile came out, and it was like, oh, this is a great catalyst to spur that policy decision. In New Orleans, last year, the mayor, Mitch Landrieu, started a new effort called the Economic Prosperity Strategy. So a local data shop had found that 52% of the city's African-American men were jobless. So this is not unemployed because it doesn't include the labor force, but people who were not working. And that data point was so salient that it spurred the city to launch this economic prosperity strategy, which is, they brought together, we worked with them on the process, so they brought together the men who were unemployed, or some of the men who were unemployed, and anchor institutions, the city's hospitals, education centers, who were having jobs come online that they needed filled, and over the next several years, there would be 30,000 jobs coming online. How do you connect them? And so that initiative has started now. So an example of how the data can spur policy action. In Dubuque, Iowa, so this is a city that is not included in the atlas, but they are using our framework and the data profiles to do their own community dialogues and create their own community equity profile in a smaller city. Dubuque is just a city of about 60,000 people, and the Community Foundation is pulling together and leading this effort community-wide to really talk about inclusion in Dubuque, which is predominantly white, but they had IBM located there, so that brought a lot of higher skilled immigrants into the community. And then they also have people moving down from Chicago who are African American, lower income, Section 8, moving into Section 8 housing. And so they're using this process of looking at the data to think about how to include everybody. And then in our own work, in our own advocacy work, we're using this data. So we are a part of we lead an alliance for boys and men of color in California. We staff a select committee on this issue. We work on school discipline issues and lots of other policy strategies to remove the barriers for boys of color, boys and men of color. And also to inform media and data-driven journalism. So we were really happy to have the National Journal ask us for some of the detailed data behind the atlas so that they could look at achievement gaps nationally in metros and do this data-driven journalism reporting about it. And we just scoped out a series about 8 different indicators that they're gonna do these series around. One last example, this is not from our own data, but it's been mentioned earlier today. So, how do you get to data that's really informing strategies and data for continuous improvement? And I think the collective impact world is where this is really starting to happen. So the cradle to career efforts, this is a picture of an effort in Multnomah County. They're looking at a series of benchmarks, and steps, milestones that children would meet to be on the path to careers. And then they're using data, which they gather locally. It's getting the systems together to provide this data on a regular basis to track how people are doing and to disaggregate by race and to see how they're doing to meet those milestones. So a lot of exciting efforts. We see this as a living resource we're going to continue to build out and make more useful for advocates. We've gotten a lot of positive reception. People want more data, of course, when you start to give to them, but we're really excited about it. So.
Please join me in thanking our speakers. I think our stomachs are telling us it's time for lunch.
Yes, thanks to, we're not gonna have time for questions because of what we've been doing here. But as you know, Sarah we'll have one of the demonstrations at lunch, and Tom is not shy to be approached. And so we do now have, so we're gonna break for lunch. We have until 1:45. So the first thing is there will be lunch in the second room. You go through the main room here and into where we had coffee this morning. That's where that is. You can eat your lunch there in the room out here. But this room, we're going to set up for World Cafe at 1:45. In case you didn't know, you guys are going to have to do the work from now on. And so actually you need to remove your material from the tables because we'll set up for that. If there are not enough places to perch for lunch, you could come in here and have your lunch. But by 1 o'clock, we need to move out of there. So and we'll from 1:45 until 3:15, we'll do these World Cafe breakout conversations. We'll report that out, and then we'll have a wrap-up session at the end. So the whole morning was terrific, I thought. And even this last session, I just want to say, these issues, the policy and metrics issues in this equity work are things that our roundtable, well, our community, but our roundtable really needs to return to in a lot more detail. So I particularly appreciate this panel. So thank you all for your patience. You now have lunch, and we'll be reconvened here at 1:45. And take your stuff with you. Thank you very much.